Why do my fields bloom for you?
A barren farm bloomed overnight. Even the dead soil rose like it remembered life. And when the alien who caused it tried to flee, a single human asked the one question her entire galaxy never dared. If flowers can choose their savior, what else might choose him too? Where are you watching from? And if you want more human against the impossible stories, subscribe to help this universe grow. Now, let the story begin. Marshall Dune woke at 4 in the morning because that was what farmers did. Not because he wanted to, not because there was hope in it anymore, just because stopping felt like admitting the truth he already knew. The house was too quiet. It had been quiet for 3 years now, ever since Sarah died. Her coffee mug still sat on the shelf, unwashed, because washing it felt like erasing her. The bed was too big. The mornings were too cold. The silence was too heavy. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his Sector 51 tractor coatsy hat, a gift from Sarah back when they used to laugh about conspiracy theories, and walked out into the Nebraska darkness. The fields stretched endlessly in every direction, swallowed by pre-dawn shadows. His land, his family's land. 4 generations of Dunes had worked this soil, and he was going to be the one who lost it. The letter from the bank sat on the kitchen counter, 3 weeks overdue. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 14 days. Marshall didn't need to read it again. The words were burned into his mind like a brand. He inspected the northern fields first, then the eastern rows. Dead, dry, lifeless. The drought had been brutal, and his equipment was too old to keep up. Everything felt like pushing water uphill with his bare hands. When he reached the southern field, he stopped walking. The field was covered in flowers, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, wildflowers in colors he didn't recognize, blooming impossibly in soil that should have been barren. Purple, silver, pale blue that seemed to shimmer in the dying starlight. Marshall stood there, hat in hand, completely still. This didn't make sense. No rain, no fertilizer, no explanation. Then he saw her. At the far edge of the field, near the fence line, a figure stood watching him. Except she wasn't standing. Her feet hovered 20 centimeters above the ground, pale robes drifting around her like she was underwater. Her skin had a faint luminescence, like moonlight trapped beneath human flesh. She looked terrified. Their eyes met across the impossible flowers. Marshall opened his mouth to speak, but she turned, and the flowers around her withered instantly, petals blackening and crumbling to dust. She was doing this. Somehow, the flowers responded to her like they were part of her nervous system. "Ma'am," Marshall called out, his voice rough from disuse. "Is that you doing this?" She froze mid-flight. He took a step closer, hands raised, moving like he would with a spooked horse. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to understand." She looked back at him, and even from this distance, he could see her eyes were too large, too bright, violet, like uncut amethyst. "Why do my fields bloom for you?" The question hung in the cold morning air. She stared at him for 3 heartbeats, then vanished into the darkness, floating away faster than he could follow. The flowers she left behind died within seconds. Marshall stood alone in the dead field holding his hat, wondering if he'd finally lost his mind. But when the sun rose an hour later, the evidence remained. A perfect circle of ash where flowers had been, and a single silver petal caught on the fence wire. Something impossible had just walked into his life. And Marshall Dune, who had nothing left to lose, decided not to call the authorities. Not yet. She came back the next night. Marshall was sitting on his porch, coffee gone cold in his hands, when he saw her floating near the barn. She was watching him from a distance, half hidden in shadow, like a ghost, uncertain whether it still belonged to the world. He didn't stand up, didn't call out, just set down his mug and waited. After 5 minutes, she drifted closer, 10 feet away, then 8. Her features were clearer now, beautiful in an unsettling way, too perfect, too delicate, like something carved from pearl and starlight. Her eyes reflected the porch light, turning them into pools of liquid amethyst. "You didn't call anyone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. English, but with an accent he couldn't place. Musical and strange. "No, ma'am." "Why?" Marshall considered the question. "You looked scared. Figured you had your reasons for hiding." She stared at him like he'd spoken in an alien language, which he supposed he had. "I don't want trouble," she continued, floating backwards slightly. "I didn't mean to affect your crops. I can't control it when I feel—" She stopped herself. "When you feel what?" But she was already retreating. Marshall stood slowly, keeping his movements calm. "Hold on. I'm not asking you to explain yourself. I'm just saying—" He gestured at the porch. "I was about to make dinner. If you're hungry, there's enough." She froze again. "Why would you feed me?" "Because you look like you need it." The logic seemed to break something in her. Her eyes shimmered, and for a moment Marshall thought she might cry. Instead, she fled, floating away into the darkness so fast she seemed to blink out of existence. Marshall sighed and went inside. But the next morning, he found evidence that she'd returned. A small circle of silver flowers had bloomed on his porch step, right where he'd been sitting. And the food he'd left on the fence post was gone. That became their pattern. Marshall would leave food. She would take it, always at night. Always when he wasn't looking. Sometimes he'd catch glimpses of her drifting through his fields, 10 inches above the ground, moving like she was caught in a current only she could feel. On the 4th night, he left coffee and a blanket on the porch railing. She didn't take the blanket, but the coffee cup was empty in the morning. On the 5th night, he sat outside and spoke into the darkness. "I don't know what you're running from, but you're safe here. Far as I'm concerned, this farm's big enough for 2 people who want to be left alone." Silence answered him. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "Thank you." Marshall turned, and there she was, floating in the yard, wrapped in moonlight and fear. She was crying now, soundless tears that caught the starlight as they fell. "I haven't heard kindness in a long time," she whispered. "What's your name?" "Nayella." "Marshall." He tipped his hat. "Pleasure to meet you, Nayella." She smiled, tentative, broken, but real, and the grass beneath her began to bloom. Tiny white flowers spread like ripples in water, and she gasped, looking down in panic. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" "Nayella?" He kept his voice steady. "I'm not afraid of flowers." She looked up at him, disbelief written across her alien features. "Why do my fields bloom for you?" Marshall asked again, softer this time. Nayella floated there, trembling, suspended between fear and something else. Something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. "Because," she finally answered, "I think you're the first person who's ever asked." Nayella started staying closer to the house after that night. Not inside. She seemed afraid of enclosed spaces, but near enough that Marshall could see her floating between the barn and the fields during his early morning rounds. She spoke more too, slowly at first, like someone relearning a language they'd tried to forget. "Your land was dying, Ma," she said one morning, watching him repair a fence post. "I can feel it, like a heartbeat that's fading. Yeah, well, been a rough few years. But now it's waking up." She drifted lower, almost touching the ground. Almost. "My presence, my emotions, they affect living things. I can't control it. When I feel safe, things grow. When I'm afraid, they wither." Marshall hammered the post into place. "Sounds like a useful gift." "It's a curse." Her voice went hollow. "On my world, I was called unstable, dangerous. They said my power was too reactive, too tied to my feelings, that I couldn't be trusted near important ecosystems." "Who said that?" "The Elendari Council, my people." She wrapped her arms around herself. "They were right. I destroyed a sacred garden during a surge. I couldn't stop it. Everything burned with light and died all at once." Marshall set down his hammer. "That why you're here?" She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "I fled, stowed away on a refugee ship during the Great Psychic Migration. I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought if I could just be alone, I wouldn't hurt anyone else." You haven't heard anything here, Nayella." "Not yet." The weight in those two words made Marshall's chest ache. He'd heard that kind of certainty before, the belief that you were destined to fail. He'd felt it himself every time he looked at the foreclosure notice. "Come here," he said, pulling a thermos from his work bag. "I made extra coffee." She floated closer, hesitant, and he poured a cup. She took it with both hands, marveling at the warmth. "Why do you keep helping me?" "Because you need it. That's reason enough." They sat in companionable silence while the sun climbed higher. Around them, the fields were changing. Green shoots pushed through soil that had been dead for months. The air smelled like rain, even though the sky was clear. Nayella was healing his land just by existing here. But she was also fading. Marshall saw it in the way her light dimmed when she thought he wasn't looking, the way she held herself like something breaking under invisible weight. "You're giving too much," he said quietly. "Whatever this power is, it's taking something from you." "It always does." Before he could respond, a truck rumbled down the access road, his neighbor, Frank Morrison, slowing to stare at the transformed southern field. Nayella vanished instantly, blinking out of sight so fast Marshall's eyes couldn't track the movement. Frank rolled down his window. "Marshall, what the hell did you do to your field? That some kind of new fertilizer?" "Just got lucky with the weather, I guess." Frank's eyes narrowed. "Right. Lucky." He drove off, but Marshall saw him glancing in the rearview mirror, suspicion written across his face. That night, Marshall found Nayella in the barn, floating near the ceiling rafters, speaking in her sleep. "Ziltor, please, don't leave me here. Ziltor." The name was foreign, painful in her voice. When Marshall approached, she woke with a gasp, eyes wild. "Who's Ziltor?" he asked gently. Her entire body tensed. For a moment, flowers exploded around them, violent, chaotic blooms that grew too fast and died immediately, filling the barn with the smell of crushed petals. Then she fled into the night. Marshall stood in the wreckage of dying flowers and realized two things. Nayella was running from something worse than exile, and he was going to protect her anyway. The letter arrived 3 days later. Official government letterhead. Subject: Investigation of anomalous biofloral activity. They were coming. Nayella tried to help with morning chores, and Marshall learned that psychic aliens had absolutely no idea how to use a shovel. "You're supposed to push down with your foot," he explained, watching her float 3 inches above the tool, trying to make it work through sheer force of will. "My people don't use primitive digging implements," she said defensively. "My people don't float. Guess we're both learning." She actually laughed at that, a sound like wind chimes, surprised and genuine. The chickens in the nearby coop immediately started laying eggs, all of them at once, like they'd forgotten how until they heard joy. Marshall scratched his head. "Well, that's new." Over the next few days, Nayella became a fixture around the farm. She couldn't do physical labor, but she tried. Watching her attempt to milk a cow while hovering was simultaneously the most ridiculous and endearing thing Marshall had ever seen. "They don't like it when you float," he said, biting back a smile. "I'm not trying to float. This is just how I exist." "Right. Well, Bessie here exists on the ground, so maybe you could, I don't know, sit." Nayella looked at him like he'd suggested she breathe underwater. "I don't sit. Never. The ground and I have an understanding. We don't touch." But later that afternoon, when she thought he wasn't watching, Marshall saw her lower herself onto the porch step. Her feet brushed the wood for maybe 3 seconds before she shot back up, looking terrified and exhilarated. She was trying. The animals noticed her more each day. The horses followed her around like disciples. The barn cat, who'd hated everyone since Sarah died, curled up beneath wherever Nayella was floating and purred like an engine. "Why do they do that?" Marshall asked. Nayela reached down to scratch the cat's ears, her fingers barely touching fur. My people believe animals recognize psychic resonance. They feel my emotional frequency. And what frequency is that? She was quiet for a moment. Loneliness, I think. They recognize someone who's been lost. Marshall understood that better than he wanted to admit. That evening, he taught her about human food. Real human food, not the simple things he'd been leaving on the fence. He made stew. Nothing fancy, just what he remembered Sarah cooking on cold nights, and Nayela watched with fascination as he explained each ingredient. This is a potato. Grows underground. Tastes like comfort. That's not a scientific description? It's the right description. She tried the stew and her eyes went wide. This is... She searched for words. The Ilindari sustain ourselves on energy infusions. We don't have this. What, taste? Pleasure and sustenance. We feed because we must. You feed because it brings joy. She looked at the bowl like it held universe-altering secrets. You're very strange beings, says the woman who floats. I'm not a woman. Could have fooled me. She smiled, and this time when flowers bloomed around them, she didn't panic. She just watched them grow, peaceful for the first time since he'd met her. Marshall, she said quietly, the Elendari don't value what you value. They think emotions are pollution, inefficient. But you... She gestured at the farm, the stew, the blooming plants. You think emotions make life worth living. Don't they? She didn't answer, but he saw something shift in her expression, like a door opening after being locked for years. Later that night, Marshall woke to sounds outside. He grabbed his jacket and found Nayela in the field, floating higher than usual, maybe 40 feet up, completely still. Nayela, what's wrong? She didn't respond. Her eyes were closed and her body was rigid, caught in something invisible. Then she gasped and dropped 10 feet before catching herself. What happened? Psychic surge, she whispered, trembling. They happen sometimes. I lose control and drift away. I thought... Her voice broke. I thought I was back there, in the garden, watching everything die. Marshall walked beneath her. You're not there. You're here, with me, on a farm in Nebraska where nothing is dying. She lowered slowly until they were eye level. Why do you stay? She asked. I'm dangerous. I could lose control. I could destroy everything you have left. Nayela. He met her impossible eyes. Everything I have is already dying. You're the first thing that's made it grow in years. So maybe stop trying to convince me you're a monster. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, deliberately, she reached out and touched his shoulder. Where her hand made contact, a single silver flower bloomed from his shirt collar, growing through the fabric like it had always belonged there. Oops, she whispered. Marshall plucked the flower and tucked it behind his ear. Suits me, he said. She laughed so hard she dropped another 6 inches toward the ground. 2 weeks after Nayela arrived, Marshall's fields were unrecognizable. The southern field exploded with wheat so golden it looked like captured sunlight. The northern plots, dead for 3 seasons, produced corn that grew 8 feet tall. Even the vegetable garden behind the house, neglected since Sarah's death, was suddenly overflowing with tomatoes, peppers, and herbs Marshall didn't remember planting. When the bank inspector came for the scheduled foreclosure assessment, he walked the property twice, checked his paperwork 3 times, and finally stammered, Mr. Doon, I don't know what you did, but this land is worth 3 times what it was 2 months ago. Marshall paid off his back debts that afternoon, the first time in 3 years he'd been able to breathe without the weight of failure crushing his chest. Nayela watched from the barn loft, barely visible. You did this, Marshall told her that evening. You saved this place. No. She floated down beside him. You saved it by letting me stay. I'm just here. You're more than just here. She looked at him, and something unspoken passed between them. Something neither was ready to name yet. That night, Marshall cooked a real dinner. Roast chicken with vegetables from the garden, biscuits the way Sarah used to make them, even a pie that came out slightly burned but edible. Niella sat at the table. Actually sat, feet tucked under her, floating only 2 inches above the chair, and stared at the spread like it was a religious experience. What is this? It's called a celebration. Humans do it when things go right. She tried the chicken and made a sound that might have been inappropriate in polite company. This is, Marshall, your species discovered meaning. It's just food. It's not just food. It's attention and care made physical. It's... She gestured helplessly. The Elendari would dismiss this as primitive chemistry, but it's not. It's love. The word hung in the air between them. Marshall cleared his throat. Well, seemed like you deserved something nice. They ate in comfortable silence, and for the first time since Sarah died, the house felt less empty. Afterward, Niella tried to help with dishes. It went about as well as expected, plates floating in midair while she scrubbed them psychically. But Marshall didn't comment, just dried each one and put it away, learning the rhythm of working beside someone again. "Marshall," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her tone made him pause. What I said before, about the garden I destroyed, it wasn't the whole truth. She stared at her reflection in the dishwater. I had a partner, a bondmate. His name was Zale Tor, so that was the name from her nightmares. The council wanted to study my power. They said it was for the good of our people, that I could help terraform planets, but they... Her voice fractured. They pushed too hard, forced my emotions into extremes to see what would happen. Zaltor tried to stop them. He died protecting me from their machines. Marshall set down the dish towel. Niella, the garden didn't die because I'm unstable. It died because I was being tortured, and no one stopped it until it was too late. She turned to face him, eyes blazing with old grief. I didn't flee because I was dangerous. I fled because they wanted to make me a weapon. Rage, cold and absolute, settled in Marshall's chest. Those sons of... I'm telling you because you deserve to know what you're protecting. I'm not just a refugee. I'm someone they'll look for, someone they'll want back. Then they can't have you. She looked at him with something like wonder. You don't understand what the council is capable of. Don't care. You're not going back to people who hurt you. Before she could respond, headlights swept across the window. A car was coming up the drive, unmarked, but with government plates. Niella's light flickered like a candle in wind. Marshall walked to the door, stepping between her and whoever was coming. The man who emerged from the car wore a suit that looked wrong for farmland. He had the bearing of someone used to being obeyed, with gray threading through his hair and eyes that cataloged everything. Mr. Dune, I'm Agent Fletcher, Interspecies Integration Bureau. I'm here about the anomalous biofloral activity reported in this sector. Marshall leaned against the doorframe. My fields are growing again. That's only anomalous if you've forgotten what healthy land looks like. Fletcher smiled thinly. We've detected psychic resonance consistent with a Lindari eco-manipulation. Specifically, an unregistered refugee with an unstable Class R designation. Behind Marshall, Niella made a sound like a wounded animal. Don't have any idea what you're talking about, or Marshall said flatly. Mr. Dune, harboring an unregistered alien is a federal offense. If you're concealing, I'm concealing nothing. You're trespassing. Leave. Fletcher's expression hardened. I'll be back with a warrant. And Mr. Dune? Class R designations exist for a reason. These beings are environmental hazards. If she loses control, she could devastate this entire region. He got back in his car and drove away. Marshall closed the door and found Niella floating near the ceiling, shaking. They found me. They always find me. Niella, look at me. She lowered slowly. I meant what I said. You're not going anywhere. You don't understand what you're risking. I'm risking a farm that was already dying and a life I'd given up on. Doesn't seem like much of a risk to me. She floated there, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, Why? because everyone deserves someone who stays. Outside, the fields bloomed under starlight, but Marshall knew the celebration was over. The real fight was just beginning. That night, Nayla told him everything. They sat in the barn, her floating, him on a hay bale, while she spoke words she'd never said aloud. The story came out in fragments, like pulling shrapnel from an old wound. I was 23 when the council selected me for the terraforming initiative. They said my power was a gift to my people, that I could help make dead worlds bloom. I believed them. Zeltor believed them too. Her light dimmed as she spoke. The training started gently. They'd place me in controlled environments and ask me to feel specific emotions. Joy to encourage growth. Calm to stabilize ecosystems. It worked. I was good at it. What changed? They wanted more. Faster growth, stronger reactions. They built machines that could manipulate my emotional state, amplifiers that would force me to feel terror, rage, euphoria, all in rapid cycles. They said it was necessary to unlock my full potential. Marshall's hands clenched into fists. Zeltor was my bonded partner, not romantic. Elendari don't bond that way, but deeper, soul-tied. He felt what I felt, saw what I saw. When they started the experiments, he tried to intervene. Told them they were breaking something fundamental in me. She wrapped her arms around herself, floating lower. They didn't stop. They increased the intensity. During one session, they pushed so hard that I lost myself completely. My power exploded outward. The sacred garden of Lumenis, our most important cultural site, was caught in the surge. 300 years of cultivated peace, destroyed in seconds. Nayla. Zeltor tried to sever my connection to the machines. He succeeded, but the feedback, her voice broke completely. It burned through his mind. He died while I was screaming inside their laboratory. Silence filled the barn. The council blamed me, said I was too unstable, too emotional, too human-like in my responses. They classified me as Class R, restricted, dangerous. They wanted to put me in stasis until they could fix me. That's when you ran, she nodded. I stowed away on a refugee transport during the Great Migration, changed my designation, hid among the wounded and displaced, I thought. She laughed bitterly. I thought if I could just disappear, I'd never hurt anyone again. You didn't hurt anyone. They did. Does it matter? The garden is still dead. Zeltor is still gone. Marshall stood and walked closer. Yes, it matters. You were a victim, not a criminal. And those council members who tortured you? They're the enemy here, not you. You don't know what the council is like. They see beings like me as resources. If they find me, they'll take me back. They'll say it's for my own good, for public safety, and Earth's government will let them, because we signed treaties. I don't care about treaties. She looked at him, desperate. Marshall, you can't fight an entire galactic council. Watch me. Before she could argue, footsteps sounded outside. Fletcher had returned, this time with 2 officers and official documentation. Marshall Dune, Fletcher called through the door. I have authorization to search this property for unregistered alien entities. You can comply voluntarily, or we can do this the hard way. Marshall opened the door, blocking the entrance. You got a warrant? Fletcher held up a tablet. Signed 1 hour ago. Now step aside. Nayla appeared behind Marshall, floating in full view, her light casting strange shadows across the barn. I'm here, she said quietly. No need to search. Fletcher's expression shifted, triumph mixed with something that might have been pity. Nayla Rice, Elendari Class R refugee. You are hereby detained for violating immigration protocols and presenting environmental risk. You will be held pending evaluation and potential repatriation to your people. Like hell she will, Marshall growled. Mr. Dune, interfering with a federal operation. She's not a risk. Look at my land. Look what she's done here. Does that look like destruction to you? Fletcher glanced at the blooming fields, then back at Nayela. Class R designations are based on potential, not current behavior. She has documented history of catastrophic power surges caused by people torturing her. That's not in the official report. Then the official report is a lie. Fletcher's jaw tightened. My orders are clear. She comes with us, tonight. Nayela stepped forward, light flickering. I'll go. Don't make this harder, Marshal. They'll arrest you too. Let them. She turned to him, eyes pleading. You've given me more than I deserved, a place to rest. Someone who saw me as person, not a problem. I won't let you lose everything for me. You're not a problem to be solved, Nayela. You're someone who deserves to be free. Freedom isn't for beings like me. The resignation in her voice broke something in Marshall. He grabbed her hand, actually grabbed it, the first time he'd ever deliberately touched her. Where their skin met, flowers exploded from the ground in a wave of silver and gold, spreading across the entire yard in seconds. Fletcher stumbled backward. Control yourself. I'm trying, Nayela gasped, pulling away from Marshall. The flowers stopped growing, but they'd already covered everything in a carpet of impossible color. See? Fletcher said coldly. Unstable. Dangerous. This is exactly why Class R protocols exist. He nodded to his officers, who moved toward Nayela. But Marshall stepped between them, stance wide, hands steady. You want her, he said quietly. You go through me first. Fletcher stared at him. You're willing to be arrested? To lose this farm? For an alien you've known 2 weeks? Marshall thought about Sarah's empty coffee mug, the years of silence, the fields that had been dying before Nayela arrived. The way she'd looked at him like kindness was a language she'd forgotten. Yeah, he said. I am. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Nayela's light went out completely. She dropped to the ground, actually dropped, feet hitting earth for the first time since Marshall met her, and crumpled. Nayela! Marshall caught her before she hit the dirt. She was barely conscious, trembling, her skin ice cold. What did you do? He snarled at Fletcher. Nothing. This is a psychological break. It happens with unstable psychics when they... But Marshall wasn't listening. He was carrying Nayela into the house, kicking the door shut behind him, and the officers didn't try to stop him. Through the window, he saw Fletcher making a call. The council was being notified, and Marshall Doone, farmer and widower, realized he was about to go to war. Nayela didn't wake for 8 hours. When she did, she was floating again, but barely. 6 inches off the bed, flickering like a dying light, her eyes unfocused and distant. Where? My house! You collapsed! Marshall sat in the chair beside her, where he'd been all night. Fletcher and his people are outside, waiting. You should have let them take me. Not an option. She turned her head slowly, and he saw the exhaustion carved into her features. Marshall, I can feel them. The council. They're coming. They've been notified that I've been found, and they're sending a retrieval team. How long? Days? Maybe less. See, she closed her eyes. They'll take me back to the laboratories. They'll say it's for treatment, for stability training, but it's not. They'll break me down until there's nothing left but the power they want to use. I won't let that happen. You can't stop it. She looked at him, and her expression was older than it should have been. You're one human on one planet. They're a galactic council with authority over millions of worlds. You're brave and kind, but this isn't a fight you can win. Maybe not, but I can make it expensive for them. Before she could respond, voices erupted outside, shouting. Marshall moved to the window and saw his neighbors gathered at the property line. Frank Morrison at the front, pointing at the house. He's harboring an illegal alien. Look at those flowers. That's not natural. That thing is dangerous. Other voices joined in. People Marshall had known for 20 years, suddenly afraid of what they didn't understand. Nayela appeared beside him, barely holding herself upright in the air. They're right. I am dangerous. This is what always happens. People fear what I am, and they should. They're scared. Doesn't make them right. Marshall. Her voice broke. Please, let me go. I can't watch you lose everything because of me. Not like Zaltor. I can't. She gasped, her body convulsing, and suddenly she was rising, shooting upward through the ceiling, through the roof, pulled by forces she couldn't control. Marshall ran outside in time to see her 30 feet in the air, eyes rolled back, completely unconscious. Another psychic surge. Nayla! He ran beneath her, tracking her drift as she moved across the field higher and higher. Nayla, wake up! Fletcher and his team were already moving, equipment in hand, preparing to contain her. Marshall ran faster. He found her 2 fields over, floating 40 feet up, suspended in some kind of trance. Around her, plants grew and died in rapid cycles, blooming explosively then withering to ash, over and over, as her power spiraled out of control. Sir, step back. One of Fletcher's officers aimed some kind of device at Nayla. We're deploying an electromagnetic dampener. Don't you dare! Too late. The device activated. Nayla screamed, a sound that wasn't entirely human, and dropped 15 feet before catching herself. The psychic surge intensified, and suddenly Marshall was standing in a field of flowers that grew so fast they looked like time-lapse footage, consuming everything, turning the earth into a carpet of impossible life. Then they all died at once. Ash rained down like snow. Nayla collapsed completely, and Marshall caught her, barely, before she hit the ground. She was breathing in short, panicked gasps, not seeing him, not seeing anything. No, 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 not again. Not the garden, please. I didn't mean to. Zaltor, help me, please. Nayla, you're not there. You're here. But she was trapped in the memory, reliving her worst moment, and nothing he said could reach her. Fletcher approached slowly. Mr. Dune, this is exactly what we warned you about. She's unstable. She could level this entire county. Marshall held her tighter. She's traumatized. There's a difference. Not one that matters when lives are at risk. The only risk here is you people trying to drag her back to the place that broke her. Fletcher's expression was almost sympathetic. I'm sorry, but my orders are absolute. The Elendari Council has filed official repatriation papers. She's their citizen, their responsibility. Earth law requires we comply. Marshall looked down at Nayla, shaking in his arms, whispering apologies to someone who couldn't hear them anymore. Then he looked up at Fletcher. No. Excuse me? I said no. You're not taking her. Mr. Dune, you're under arrest for... I don't care. Arrest me, throw me in jail. Take the farm. I don't care. But you're not taking her. Fletcher stared at him like he was crazy. Maybe he was. The crowd of neighbors had followed, watching from a distance. Marshall met their eyes, Frank, Sarah's old friend Janet, the Martinez family from down the road, and saw fear there. Fear of Nayla, fear of the unknown. He also saw shame. You all know me, Marshall called out. You know I'm not stupid, and I'm not reckless. This girl isn't a monster. She's scared and hurt and alone. And if that makes me a criminal for protecting her, then so be it. Silence answered him. Then Frank stepped forward. Marshall, we've known each other 30 years. You're a good man, but that thing... Her name is Nayla. That thing just turned a field into a graveyard in 30 seconds. What happens when she does that to the town? To people? Marshall had no answer that would satisfy them. He looked down at Nayla, still lost in her trauma, and made a choice. Then I'll make sure she never does. I'll stay with her, every day. I'll help her control it. But I won't let you send her back to the people who tortured her. Marshall, Fletcher said quietly, that's not how this works. Then change how it works. Before Fletcher could respond, Nayla finally came back to herself. She looked up at Marshall, saw where they were, what had happened, and her face crumpled. I did it again. I destroyed nothing. You destroyed nothing, just some flowers. You're lying. Nayla, He made her look at him. "You're not a monster. You're someone who's been through hell and is still trying. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." She stared at him, disbelief and hope warring in her expression. Then she whispered, "Why can't you just hate me? It would be so much easier." "I know, but I can't." Sir Fletcher made the call. The Elandari Council ship would arrive in 48 hours, and Marshal Doone had 2 days to figure out how to save someone who'd given up on being saved. Marshall spent the next morning in the county library, something he hadn't done since high school. He researched refugee rights, interspecies treaties, legal precedents for asylum claims. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, watched him with curiosity as he filled 3 notebooks with information that might or might not save Naella's life. When he returned to the farm, he found someone unexpected waiting on his porch. Frank Morrison, hat in hand. "Before you tell me to leave," Frank said quickly, "I need to say something." Marshall waited. "I was wrong yesterday. I was scared. And I said things, did things that weren't right. Sarah would have been ashamed of me." He met Marshall's eyes. "That girl in there, she helped you, didn't she? Made your fields grow. She did more than that. Then I'll testify to that. If it helps, I'll tell them what I saw, that she brought life back, not destruction." Something loosened in Marshall's chest. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Most of the others still think she's dangerous." "But," Frank pulled a folded paper from his pocket, "I talked to my daughter. She works in immigration law. She says if you can prove Naella's being persecuted by her home government, you might be able to file for protected status." Marshall took the paper. It was a list of legal firms, contact numbers, and case precedents. "Frank, just don't tell anyone I helped. I've got a reputation to maintain." He almost smiled. "Good luck, Marshall, both of you." After he left, Marshall went inside and found Naella floating near the kitchen window, watching birds. She'd been quiet since the surge, barely speaking, barely moving. "I'm going to fight this," Marshall told her. "Legally, every way I can. It won't work. The treaties are absolute. Then I'll find the exceptions. I'll make them listen." She turned to face him, and her expression was devastating in its gentleness. "Marshall, you've already done more than anyone had a right to expect. You gave me weeks of peace, of feeling like a person instead of a problem. That's more than I thought I'd ever have again. It's not enough. It's everything." They stood there in the morning light, and Marshall realized he was fighting 2 battles, one against the council and one against Naella's own resignation. "Try something for me," he said suddenly. "What?" "Come outside. Actually outside, not floating. Try to touch the ground." "Marshall, I can't." "You did it before. When you collapsed, your feet touched earth. That wasn't control. That was failure." "Maybe. Or maybe it was your body knowing what you needed." He held out his hand. "Trust me. Just try." After a long moment, she took his hand. They walked outside together, her floating beside him like always. The morning was cool, with that perfect Nebraska clarity that made everything feel possible. "Okay," Marshall said. "Lower yourself. Slowly." Here, Naella closed her eyes and concentrated. She dropped 1 inch, 2 inches, 6 inches, then stopped. "I can't. There's something blocks me, like a wall." "What kind of wall?" "Fear." She opened her eyes. "If I touch the ground, I'm real. I'm here. I can't run anymore. I can't pretend I'm just drifting through." Marshall squeezed her hand. "Naella, you've been running since Ziltor died. Maybe it's time to stop." "And if I stop running and they still take me?" "Then at least you'll have tried to be free, really free, not just hiding." She stared at the ground beneath her like it was an enemy. Then slowly, so slowly Marshall could barely see it happening, she lowered herself. 10 centimeters. 5. 3. Her toes brushed grass. The field erupted in flowers. silver and gold and colors that had no names, spreading outward in waves that made the air shimmer. Nayella gasped and shot back up. I did it. I touched. Did you see? Marshall was grinning. I saw. For the first time since the surge, Nayella smiled. Really smiled, not the broken fragments she'd managed before. Try again, Marshall encouraged. This time, she lowered faster. Toes touched, held for 1 second. 2. More flowers bloomed, but controlled this time, beautiful instead of chaotic. She lifted up, laughing. It doesn't hurt. I thought it would hurt. Why would it hurt? Because every time I've been grounded before, it meant I was trapped, contained. But this, she looked at him, this feels like choosing. They practiced for an hour. Each time, she held the contact longer. Each time the flowers grew more vibrant. By noon, she could stand for 10 full seconds. That afternoon, a car pulled up, not Fletcher, but a woman in professional attire carrying a briefcase. Mr. Dune? I'm attorney Sarah Chen, Frank Morrison's daughter. I understand you need help with an asylum case. Marshall could have kissed Frank. Sarah spent 3 hours with them, documenting everything. Nayella's testimony about the torture, the death of Zaltor, the forced experimentation. She recorded the blooming fields, took photographs, gathered evidence. This is strong, she said finally. Not guaranteed, but strong. The Council violated multiple interspecies ethics protocols. If we can prove systematic abuse, we can, Marshall said firmly. Then we file tomorrow. I'll need Nayella to testify. Nayella, who'd been floating quietly nearby, lowered herself. I'll do it. I'll tell them everything. That evening, as the sun set, they sat on the porch together, Marshall in his usual chair, Nayella floating beside him at eye level. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Really? Marshall was quiet for a long time. My wife died 3 years ago, he finally said. Cancer. I had 6 months to say goodbye, and I still wasn't ready. After she was gone, I just stopped living, stopped caring. I was just waiting for the farm to die so I could die too. Marshall, then you showed up, floating and scared and trying so hard not to be a burden, and something in me woke up because you needed someone to stay, and I realized, his voice roughened, I realized I needed someone to stay for. Nayella was crying silently, tears catching starlight. So that's why. Not because you're special or powerful or different, because you're someone who deserves to be fought for. And I've got fight left in me after all. She reached out and touched his face, deliberately, gently, and a single silver flower grew from his collar. If we lose, she whispered, if they take me anyway, we won't lose. But if we do, I want you to know. You gave me something I thought died with Zaltor. You gave me hope. Marshall covered her hand with his. Then hold on to it. We're going to need it. The next morning, they filed the asylum claim. Fletcher received the paperwork with visible frustration. This buys you 48 hours at most. The Council ship is already in orbit. 48 hours is enough. For what? Marshall looked at Nayella, who was floating beside him. Determination replacing fear in her expression. To prove she's worth saving, and that Earth is worth protecting her. Fletcher shook his head. You're fighting the entire galaxy, Mr. Dune. Yeah, Marshall said, but I'm not fighting alone anymore. He glanced at Nayella, who lowered herself until her feet brushed the ground, held steady, and smiled. The psychic storm hit Nebraska at 3 a.m. Marshall woke to the sound of animals screaming. Not normal fear, something deeper, primal, as if the universe itself was howling. He ran outside and stopped dead. The sky was wrong. Colors that shouldn't exist swirled overhead like aurora borealis crossed with lightning, casting everything in sickening shades of purple and green. The air felt thick, charged with energy that made his skin crawl. And Nayella was rising. She floated upward involuntarily, eyes closed, body rigid, pulled by forces beyond her control. Already she was 30 feet up, 40, 50, her light blazing so bright it hurt to look at. "Nayella!" She didn't respond, couldn't respond. Her consciousness was somewhere else, drowning in the psychic current that was sweeping across the planet. Fletcher and his team arrived within minutes, equipment already deploying. It's a psychic storm. Happens when multiple species' mental frequencies align. For psychics like her, it's overwhelming. She'll lose complete control. How do we stop it? We don't. We contain her until it passes. No. Mr. Dune, look around. Marshall looked. The fields were going insane. Plants grew to monstrous heights in seconds, twisted into unnatural shapes, then died just as fast. Flowers bloomed and rotted simultaneously. Trees bent like they were made of rubber. The earth itself seemed to pulse with Nayella's panicked heartbeat. "She's going to level everything within a mile," Fletcher said. "Maybe more. We need to sedate her psychically. That's what killed Zaltor." "It's the only option." Marshall ran toward where Nayella hovered, now 60 feet up and climbing. The psychic pressure increased with every step, making his head pound, his vision blur. It felt like walking through water made of broken glass. "Nayella, look at me!" Her eyes snapped open, but they weren't her eyes anymore. They were pure amethyst light, burning with power she couldn't control. She spoke, but not with her voice. Multiple voices overlapping, echoing. Can't stop it. Too much. Too many voices. "Zaltor, where are you? Zaltor, help me, can't breathe, can't think, they're in my head again. The machines, the pain, make it stop. Make it stop." The field around Marshall exploded. Flowers grew so fast, they lifted chunks of earth, roots tearing through soil like explosions. Fences shattered. The barn groaned. Posts bending. Fletcher grabbed Marshall's arm. "Sir, we need to evacuate." Marshall ripped free and kept running. "Nayella!" She was 70 feet up now, body convulsing, surrounded by a corona of silver light that was spreading like a shockwave. Every living thing it touched went berserk, growing, dying, transforming, over and over in rapid cycles. The council ship appeared overhead, massive and angular, casting shadows like judgment. Fletcher's radio crackled. "The Elendari are deploying containment. They're going to pull her into the ship." "Like hell they are." Marshall did something insane. He grabbed the wooden fence post that was still standing, used it to vault onto the barn roof, then jumped. For one impossible moment, he was airborne, reaching upward, surrounded by psychic chaos and dying flowers. He caught Nayella's ankle. The contact was electric. Power surged through him, visions of her memories, her pain, her terror. He saw Zaltor dying, saw the garden burning, saw years of running and hiding and hating herself. He held on anyway. "Nayella! You're not there! You're here! With me!" They were falling now, her power flickering, his grip the only thing keeping them connected. "Marshall!" Her voice, faint beneath the psychic storm. "You shouldn't. The surge will hurt you." "I don't care." They hit the ground hard, actually hit it, both of them, her feet slamming into earth for the first time with real force. The impact sent a shockwave of power through the field. Nayella screamed, but this time it wasn't pain. It was release. Years of suppressed emotion, trauma, fear, all pouring out at once through the connection between her body and the ground she'd been afraid to touch. The psychic storm didn't stop. It intensified. But something changed. The chaotic growth became directed, focused. The flowers that had been destroying everything suddenly began weaving together, forming patterns, structures, something beautiful and impossible. Marshall held her tighter, speaking directly into her ear, his voice cutting through the howling storm. "You're not broken. You were never broken. They broke themselves trying to control you. But you're perfect exactly as you are. I destroy... No, you create. You transform. You turn death into life. That's not a curse, Nayella. That's a gift. and I'm not letting them take it away. But the Council? Screw the Council. Above them, the Elendari ship deployed something, a beam of light aimed directly at Nyella. Fletcher shouted, "They're initiating forced extraction." Marshall looked up at the ship, then down at Nyella, still shaking in his arms. "Do you want to go back? No? Then don't. Marshall, I can't fight them. You don't have to. Just do what you do best." He made her look at him, really look at him. Choose to stay. Choose the ground. Choose to be here. Tears streamed down her face. "I'm scared. I know, but I'm right here, and I'm not letting go." The extraction beam touched her, and Nyella made a choice. She slammed her feet into the earth, not floating, not hovering, but standing with full weight and full commitment, and screamed her answer into the psychic storm. "No!" The word echoed across dimensions. Her power, instead of being pulled upward by the ship, drove downward into the soil. Every root system within a mile radius lit up like fiber optics. The ground beneath them blazed with silver-gold light. The extraction beam shattered. The psychic storm, having no more chaos to feed on, began to dissipate. And the field, the entire field, spreading for acres in every direction, bloomed. Not chaotically, not destructively, but with intentional, breathtaking beauty. Flowers of every color, arranged in patterns that looked almost like language, spreading outward in waves of controlled power. Nyella stood in the center of it all, feet on the ground, Marshall's arms around her, crying and laughing at the same time. "I'm standing," she whispered. "I'm actually standing." "Yeah, you are. And I didn't destroy anything. No, you made something incredible." The Elendari ship hung overhead for one more minute, as if uncertain. Then it began to rise, retreating. Fletcher approached slowly, equipment forgotten, staring at the transformed landscape. What just happened? Marshall helped Nyella stay upright. She was trembling with exhaustion but still standing. "What happened?" he said. "Is she chose herself. And Earth. And that's not something your council gets to override." Attorney Sarah Chen was already on her phone, documenting everything. "This changes the asylum case completely. She just demonstrated control in the worst possible conditions. No court will deny protection now." Fletcher looked at Marshall, then at Nyella, then at the miracle blooming around them. "The council won't accept this. Then they'll have to learn to live with disappointment." Nyella leaned into Marshall, still not quite believing she was standing on solid ground. "You could have died. The power surge could have stopped your heart. Worth it." "How can you say that?" He met her eyes. "Because everyone deserves someone who stays when staying is dangerous. And you deserve it more than anyone I've ever met." She started crying again, but this time, the flowers that grew didn't die. They bloomed and kept blooming until the entire farm looked like a painting of what heaven might grow if heaven understood hope. The Elendari ship disappeared into the stratosphere, and Marshall Dune stood in his field, holding an alien who'd learned to touch the ground and realized that sometimes salvation looks like refusing to let go. 3 months later, Marshall woke to the smell of coffee he hadn't made. He found Nyella in the kitchen, floating 2 inches above the floor. Old habits died hard, carefully pouring from the pot like she'd watched him do 100 times. "Morning," she said, smiling. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep? Big day?" The asylum hearing was scheduled for 10, after 3 months of legal battles, testimony, and evidence. Today would determine whether Nyella could stay on Earth permanently or be returned to the Elendari Council. Marshall wasn't worried. The evidence was overwhelming. Nyella had demonstrated unprecedented control over her abilities. The farm had become something remarkable, not just productive, but transformative. Scientists from 3 universities were studying the soil, trying to understand how she'd fundamentally altered the ecosystem in ways that weren't supposed to be possible. More importantly, she'd started teaching others. 2 other Elendari refugees, both Class R, both hiding, had reached out after hearing about Nayela. She'd been working with them, helping them understand their powers weren't curses. That emotional connection wasn't weakness. Fletcher himself had submitted testimony on her behalf. Turned out watching someone choose to be free had changed his perspective on what dangerous really meant. They drove to the courthouse together, Nayela in the passenger seat, feet actually touching the floor of the truck. She'd been practicing, could walk now for up to 30 minutes before exhaustion made her float again. "Nervous?" Marshall asked. "Terrified, but also—" She looked at him. "Ready? For the first time in my life, I'm ready to stand my ground." The courtroom was packed. Frank Morrison was there, and Sarah Chen with 3 assistants. Mrs. Chen from the library, Janet and the Martinez family. Even some of the neighbors who'd been hostile 3 months ago had shown up to support her. The Elendari Council sent representatives, 3 stern figures who radiated disapproval. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, reviewed the case for 2 hours. She questioned Nayela extensively about her control, her intentions, her understanding of Earth law. Then she asked one final question. "Miss Rice, if I grant you asylum, what do you intend to do with your life?" Nayela stood, feet flat on the courtroom floor, and answered, "I want to help others like me, refugees who've been told their emotions make them dangerous. I want to teach them what a human taught me, that feeling deeply isn't a flaw, it's what makes us alive." The judge's expression softened slightly. The court finds that Miss Nayela Riss was subject to systematic psychological abuse by the Elendari Council, that her classification as Class R was punitive rather than preventive, and that she has demonstrated exceptional control and community integration. Nayela's hand found Marshall's. "Asylum is granted. Miss Riss is hereby declared a protected resident of Earth, with full rights and freedoms under interspecies treaty law." The courtroom erupted in applause. The Elendari representatives left without comment, but Marshall saw the calculation in their eyes. They'd lost this battle, but the war over how to treat psychic beings was far from over. He didn't care. Today, Nayela was free. That night, they sat on the porch like they had so many times before. The fields stretched endlessly, now producing crops that agricultural journals were calling unprecedented in yield and nutritional density. "I got a call today," Nayela said quietly, "from the Interspecies Integration Bureau. They want to create a program for refugee psychics, training, support, legal advocacy. They want me to help run it." "That's incredible." "It means traveling, speaking publicly, confronting the council's narrative." She looked at him. "I couldn't do it without you, without this place. You gave me roots when I'd forgotten how to stand still." Marshall was quiet for a moment. "You know what Sarah used to say?" She said, "Home isn't a place, it's people who choose to stay." She sounds like she was wise. She would have liked you, I think. Nayela leaned her head on his shoulder. She'd learned human gestures of affection, incorporated them into her own way of showing care. "Marshall, can I ask you something? Why do my fields bloom for you?" He smiled. She'd turned his question back on him, the one he'd asked that very first morning. "Because," he said, "you finally stopped floating away from yourself. You planted roots, and when you did, everything around you remembered how to grow." She was quiet, absorbing that. "The council representatives," she said. "They looked angry when they left. They'll get over it, or they won't. Either way, they don't get to decide your worth anymore." "What about the other psychics still trapped in their system?" Marshall knew where this was going. "You want to fight for them too. Someone has to. If I can be free, they should be free. But it's—" She hesitated. "It's big, bigger than one farm in Nebraska. So we make the farm the beginning instead of the ending." She turned to look at him. You think I'm letting you fight the Elendari Council alone, not after everything?" "Marshall, you've already done so much, and I'll do more, because that's what you do for people who matter." She started crying, but these tears were different from the ones she'd shed months ago. These were tears of gratitude, of disbelief that kindness could be real and lasting. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "Then don't. Just keep being exactly who you are." They sat together as the sun set, surrounded by impossible flowers, and Marshall thought about Sarah's empty coffee mug that he'd finally washed, about fields that had been dying until someone floating and afraid had asked if they could stay. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or violence or conquest. It was this, the stubborn refusal to let someone suffer alone when you had the power to stay. Months later, Marshall would testify before the Interspecies Council. Nyella would speak at refugee centers across 3 planets. They'd face opposition, bureaucracy, and Elendari officials who insisted that controlling unstable psychics was necessary for public safety. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Nyella Rice stood on solid ground. Really stood. No floating, no fear. And looked at the man who'd asked why fields bloomed for her when everyone else had asked what was wrong with her. "Want to practice walking tomorrow?" Marshall asked. "Maybe make it to the North Field. That's half a mile. So we'll take it slow." She smiled. "I'd like that." Above them, stars emerged in the Nebraska sky. Somewhere out there, the Elendari Council was adapting their strategies, planning new ways to categorize and control beings like Nyella. But here, on one farm that had learned to bloom again, a human and an alien sat together in comfortable silence, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to let someone fall. The fields grew, the flowers bloomed, and Nyella's feet stayed on the ground, not because she had to, because she chose to, because she'd finally found someone who taught her that staying was worth more than running, that being vulnerable was braver than being invincible, and that the ground beneath your feet could be home if someone cared enough to help you stand. Marshall Doone, farmer and widower, looked at his transformed fields and realized Sarah had been right all along. Home wasn't a place. It was people who chose to stay. And sometimes, the strongest thing a human can do is look at someone the universe has labeled as dangerous and say, "Why do my fields bloom for you?" Then stay for the answer. In the end, Nyella didn't save the farm, and Marshall didn't save an alien. They saved the small, stubborn part of each other that still believed healing was possible. And maybe that's the quiet power of humanity in the cosmic scale. We don't fix universes. We choose to stay when leaving would be easier. But what do you hold on to when everything in you says run? Which fears are still floating above the ground, waiting for someone to steady them? And if you touch the earth of your own life, really touched it, what would finally bloom? If you stayed with this story all the way to the end, write roots in the comments so I know you walked this last mile with us. Tell me where you're watching from. This channel has become a tiny galaxy of its own. And hey, subscribe, like, hype it up, share it with someone who might need it, and don't forget to watch the next video appearing right now on your screen. If you made it this far, you're officially part of the crew that chooses to stay.